I realized that YouTubers frequently ask for likes, shares, and subscriptions before they even get to the main topic of their film. I don't like it. This kind of begging behavior annoys me most of the time, but hey, maybe it works. So let's do a simple experiment. That's going to be an irreproducible, fundamentally meaningless experiment, but let's try it anyway. So please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Oh, and by the way, all the subtitles are going to be in green this time to screw up the experiment even further. Thanks. What's going to be the impact of technology on human work? This is, in principle, a difficult question because there is more than just one aspect to human work. As I argued before in some earlier episode, human work is, to a certain extent, physical work, and to a certain extent, cognitive work. Physical work can be grouped as hardware, whereas cognitive work can be grouped as software, and so they are fundamentally different, and in the production process they are complementary. So it makes a difference whether the technology substitutes people's work within hardware, if that's an example of mechanization, or substitutes people within software, which I would call automation. And moreover, it's not always going to be simply about substituting people with machines in performing certain tasks. In various cases, that's going to be a creation of new tasks. Technological progress over the decades and centuries and millennia, to a large degree, was not about substituting some factors of production with others. It was also in creating new items, new products, new ways of producing things, new tasks. And whether human work is better off or worse off after the invention of new tasks, that's in principle an open question. And also, by the way, the sole act of creating those new tasks, this research and development activity, is itself very labor-intensive, in particular, requires really a lot of cognitive work on behalf of humans. So the balance of the effects of new technologies on demand for human work, and for certain types of human work, is far from settled. Historically, automation and mechanization have had different effects on labor. And if you think about the Industrial Revolution, a large part of the progress that has been achieved at that time was thanks to mechanizing production processes that were previously carried out by people, and later by machines. So that's one aspect. On the other hand, if you think about the digital revolution, which is happening at this very moment, you realize that automation of processes that you are now observing, automation of processes replaces people with machines within software, and so may have different effects, because the processes that are automated have already been mechanized in the past. And so after the process has been both mechanized and automated, there is no scope for further inclusion of human workers at all. But is it really about substituting people with machines at all? Indeed, certain authors, certain strands of literature have been arguing that technology, to a much greater extent than it substitutes, actually augments labor. We have new tools in our hands that make us much more productive. I believe that both approaches can be actually reconciled. So think about multi-step tasks. Think about tasks that require doing more than one thing to be fully completed. If you think about today's world, it seems like virtually any task can be described as such. So what do we mean by augmentation in this context? What I would think is that augmentation, to a certain extent, is partial replacement. So you should split the actual task into at least two subtasks, and then what augmentation really means is that you replace people with machines within one of the subtasks and not within the other, and also you assume that the two subtasks are complementary to each other. You need to carry out both in order to complete the original task. By replacing people with machines in part of the whole task, you imply that the second part, which has not been automated, becomes more scarce. And as it becomes more scarce, it becomes more valuable. And all in all, you seem to augment labor in the overall task. Think of, for example, digging a ditch. Okay, you can dig a ditch with your bare hands, you can dig it with a shovel, and you can dig it with an excavator. And in the end, it's just a better tool in our hands. The excavator allows us to dig ditches much faster, much more efficiently. But once you separate the physical part of the task from the cognitive part of the task, and so split the task in at least two constituent components, you realize that augmentation is actually replacement, but within subtasks, and then increasing the value of the remaining subtask in which human work has not been replaced by machines. This reasoning, however, is valid only as long as automation is partial but not full. So if you're in a world when you can fully automate a task, so there is no subtask at all that cannot be performed by machines, you end up in a very different situation to the situation where automation was partial. This is very important in the context of the future, because so far so good. So far we've been inventing new technologies, new tasks, new subtasks, but to an essential extent, these tasks had to be carried out by people. And also R&D itself, the process of inventing the tasks, had to be carried out by people. However, if you think about the future and about the progress in AI, about the progress in automated computing and so on, information processing and communication, you may ask a reasonable question: what would happen in the future in terms of human work? Is it still going to be as it used to be, so that human skills, human cognitive work would eventually, at the level of the whole task, be augmented and not replaced? Or are we going to end up in a world with full automation, where all human cognitive work will be replaced by machines within an increasing variety of tasks? So are we to face technological unemployment? That is the elephant in the room, if you like. So if you think about the long run, the answer really depends on the actual capabilities of AI. In particular, is it ever going to reach human-level performance? So there's a very nice model by Daron Acemoglu and Pascal Restrepo, the race against the machine. Okay, so they envision a future where you see a race, and you have, on the one hand, more and more tasks being invented by people, and then people have initially an advantage in performing them. But on the other hand, you have the second process, which is automation. So the tasks increasingly get automated. So you have a race between two paces, the pace of automation and the pace of inventing new tasks. Which one wins is an open question, depends on the parameters in the model. But essentially you have three options, either one wins or the other, or there is a draw. However, in this model, even if AI wins, if I may say, so if automation ultimately is faster than creating new tasks, you still, in the limit, automate everything. But by assumption in that model, people are inventing the tasks, and people initially have an advantage of in these tasks, even if for a tiny little stretch of time. But that's just an assumption. I'm not quite sure if it's going to hold in reality. It could be the case that in one point in time, AI will actually help us in inventing these tasks, and maybe at some point replace us in inventing those tasks. And it will be the AI that will initially have the advantage in performing those tasks. In my perspective, in this regard, the future is highly uncertain, and we cannot be so sure that there's not going to be technological unemployment, and there's not going to be some, as Yuval Harari says, useless class. Another trend is that routine tasks are getting automated. So you see in the labor market that there is polarization, that especially those tasks which are routine, okay, so either manual or cognitive, but repetitive and algorithmized and possible to write down algorithmically, these are getting automated. It must be argued that new tasks are arguably labor augmenting, software augmenting in general, so they either augment human cognitive work, or maybe, in the digital era, they may to a certain extent also augment programmable hardware that is programmed with specific code. So we have this software augmenting information-specific character of technical change, which is great because ideas are non-rivalrous and therefore a source of increasing returns to scale, and therefore a likely engine of long-run growth. Technology doesn't only affect long-run growth, though. It also, to a large extent, affects factor shares and distribution of factors and wealth across the world and within countries as well. So I think it's quite instructive to look at the historical developments in terms of factor shares in reaction to the Industrial Revolution, the Digital Revolution, and more generally in technological ideas permeating the economy and changing the ways of production. So after the early stage of the Industrial Revolution in the early 19th century, you had rapid industrialization, you had a lot of replacement of human physical work with machines, you have the buildup of capital in the hands of the wealthy few. So you had this kind of Marxian regime where you would have increasing exploitation of the working class by the rich capitalists. To Marx, who lived at that time, that may seem like a secular trend that's going to continue forever. However, already in the second half of the 19th century, the trend reversed. And there is a clear reason why it reversed. The more machines and capital were employed to perform physical action, the more the production process needed human cognitive work to produce more efficiently. The more scarce has human cognitive work become. And so wages, in particular returns to cognitive work, have begun to grow. And as wages began to grow, the trend of increasing inequality, increasing capital shares reversed. So we have this famous Kuznets curve where inequality first goes up and then down. This really nicely reflects the situation during the Industrial Revolution. And not only inequality, but also capital shares. The capital share went up and then down again because when there was sufficient amount of capital in the economy, the demand for human cognitive work increased, pushing wages up, and increasing the share of output accruing to human workers, in particular to those who could perform cognitive work. Well, that also triggered public education and many mechanisms. I'm not going to discuss that at this moment, but clearly this inverted U-shaped path in the capital share and in inequality was observed. Now, contrast this to what is happening in the digital revolution. So since the 1980 or something, we are amidst the digital revolution. Computers, smartphones are permeating our economy and disrupting the production chains and so on. So what is the effect of that on factor shares and inequality? And there have been very nice studies documenting that actually the results are pretty much what you would expect. You replace people with machines, and so the part of remuneration that used to go to those people now goes to those machines, or more precisely the owners of those machines. So what's happening is that the labor share is going down, the capital share is kind of going up, but actually a lot of returns to computing machines are returns to software. So in fact they are not properly calculated, and so they quite often end up showing as the profit share. So the profit and the corporate markup. So profit shares or corporate markups are going up, labor shares are going down, and inequality is going up. And in particular, in the frontier countries, in the richest countries, in particular at the very top of the income distribution. So you have these famous results by Piketty and others who demonstrate how big the increase was in the share of the top 1% of the world income distribution. And that is to a large extent because of the returns to scale in the digital economy, and because we are seeing this technological shift where human cognitive work, which is naturally dispersed because each of us has just one brain, is getting replaced by machines, which are much more concentrated, and they are technological giants who operate the global market. And so you see why concentration in wealth is going to increase. We are arguably at an initial stage of the digital era. So we are already seeing this kind of effects which are similar to what Marx observed in the early days of the Industrial Revolution. So is there a reversal in sight? In my perception, not yet, but I can argue that it is possible that some of the trends that we are seeing will one day reverse. However, please mind the ongoing, essentially irreversible process of replacement of people with machines. So what's going to reverse is the balance between hardware and software. So far, hardware is way ahead of software. So software is scarce, and there are huge rents to automating processes. But what about the future, when there's going to be much more advanced AI, so that software will not be that scarce anymore? So this we don't know, but what you can expect is that then hardware will become more scarce, and therefore there'll be increasing rents to hardware. Is it going to be humans? I don't think so. So in the long run, as automation progresses, we'll have more and more of a trade-off between non-human hardware and non-human software, which is an interesting trade-off, but does not really speak to the labor shares. So please keep this caveat in mind. All right, so just to end with a fun fact, I wanted to mention one thing. Have you ever wondered if there could be something like automation without mechanization? Oh, here it comes, here it comes. Here you are. Okay, so have you ever thought about mechanization, automation without mechanization? And typically it doesn't happen because processes that have been already mechanized are getting automated as a second step. Here you are. But think about walking around town with a GPS on without any thought whatsoever on where you're going. So basically the computer tells you what to do and you blindly follow the instructions. Isn't that an example of automating processes that have not been mechanized? That's all for now. The squirrel and I say hi.